Hello everyone, my name is Coral. I'm an animator out at Eugene, Oregon, and I also teach at the college out here at LCC. Um, Currently, a lot of students have said that they would like to have a tutorial on how to do UV mapping. So this is what this is going to be. It's going to be this is the ELF that they give you in the animation class. So if you happen to be a student out here at Lane, um, this is an ELF that you're given, and if you want to follow along, you go ahead and open it up and follow along the UV mapping process. And if not, this will hopefully help you UV map your guys' models. First thing I'm going to talk about is about UVs in general, just really briefly. I'm not really going to get too far in depth of it, but UVs are only one-sided. So, for instance, I'm going to attach a texture to here so you can see what I'm talking about. This texture will also help us make sure UVs are even later. So it's going to kind of kill two birds with one stone. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my hyper shader. It's over here. You could access it through Windows, but I have this little column of shortcut windows that will help me out. So one here says Node Editor Hypershade. So click on that, and it opens up my hypershade. Drag this down a little bit so you see what we're doing. Okay, so Lambert 1 here, I'm assuming is probably what this guy here is set to. So if it's not, I'm just going to make sure that it is. So I'll select my model. I'll right-click the shader I want it to be attached to, and it'll have this whole little setup that'll come up here. And you just go to the top one here. It says Assign Initial Shading Group to Selection. And now this ELF's mesh is being assigned to this shader. Now to get the texture attached to it so we can see what we're doing, you right click on the shader, and then in the attribute editor over here on the right, under color, you'll see a little checkered box on the right. We're going to go ahead and check that. And then this create render nodes window pops up, and we're going to get a file. That's what we're going to attach it to. We're going to use a checkered texture pretty much. So then there's this little folder that is over in the image name. We're going to go ahead and click on the folder. Now let's pick what file we want. I downloaded a checker JPEG off the internet. You guys can find it just by Googling one. I would try to find one is high, above a 1K at least for your checker map. If it's lower, you start losing resolution and things start looking fuzzy. So try to find something that's above 1K at least. So here's my checker. I'll go ahead and open that. And it looks like nothing happened, and it's just because I haven't turned on the textured in the window here. If you're not seeing your texture pop up, you'll see this little ball here above your window, and it's got a checker attached to it. That means that if you have textures attached to your model, you have to have this checked, or you won't be able to see them on your model. Excuse me. So click this, and there's the checker. So as you can see, this checkers covers our entire model, but there's some strange areas, like for instance this foot here. The UVs are all bent and whatnot, and that's just because we haven't laid out the UVs yet. And then in some spots like over here, the checkers are really dense, and that's just because, again, we haven't laid the UVs out yet. We'll take care of that, but my point of reason why we came to this part of the lesson was because I wanted to show you that UVs are only one-sided. So get our window back down to full size. We're going to select all these faces. So if you don't know how to do that, you're going to do object mode, and then you'll do right click, go to face, and then we'll go ahead and select all these faces. And then you have to make sure you're in the polygons drop down. You'll see normals. We're going to go to normals, and we're going to go to reverse. Normals just say which direction the UVs are facing. Normally they're facing out, but sometimes they get flipped and they're facing on the inside of the model, in which case you might not notice that they've been flipped because Maya has what's called backward culling, which makes it to where what's on the inside is on the outside, what's on the outside is on the inside, so if there's some kind of normal discrepancy, you won't notice. But if you bring it into Game Engine, that won't hold. They don't do backward or backface culling unless you have it set up that way. So to show you that, we have our model selected. You go over to the attribute editor and you go to render stats. Open up that drop down and you'll see double sided is checked, and we turn off double sided. And now you can see in our arm that we had selected here that the faces are actually on the inside, and as you go around, there's a problem there. It's because the normals are flipped. So to fix that problem, we just select those faces, and we go back to normals and reverse. This should help you guys in the future as well if you end up having some issues where you accidentally have some normals got reversed. So anyways, back to UV texturing, UV mapping. So a lot of different ways to do UV mapping. If you go to create UVs, you'll see that there's a planar mapping, there's cylinder mapping, there's spherical mapping, there's auto mapping, and there's create UVs based on camera and best plane texture tool. These planar mapping, cylinder mapping, spherical mapping, these are all great if they're hard surface. If they're not, you start running into some problems where you're going to have to do a lot of manipulation. Auto mapping sounds like it's a great idea, but let's see what happens when we auto map. Auto map. Now, it did do a pretty good job of evening out all these UVs. There's no real high density areas, but if you notice, like the checkerboard doesn't line up in a lot of places because Maya just pretty much evened out the texture space, but didn't necessarily connect any of the seams for it. I'm going to show you this because we're going to the UV texture editor. You can access the UV texture editor through Windows right here, UV texture editor. But I usually work with two windows, so to keep it to where you guys can see what's going on, I'm going to actually do it by using a panel. So I'll click this one here, and I'll go to panels, panel, and then go down to UV texture editor, and then we're going to turn off our checker box. And then you can see down here that here is our model, and to the first person who's ever done UV mapping, you're like, oh, that doesn't look too bad. It actually kind of looks like my model. Or you may be thinking to yourself, what is that? I have a 3D model here. Why is it in 2D? I'll answer both those questions. To do UV texture mapping, they have to take your 3D model and lay it out in 2D space in order for you to be able to apply the texture to it. And then it is rewrapped around your 3D model with an image map, or diffuse map, if you will. Problem with this, however, which comes to the second question, is that if you look down here, there's a bunch of little parts that I didn't really know what to do with. So just nice and neatly stacked them along here. And you look down here, there's even some smaller ones. The thing is with this is that these aren't connected to anything. So as you're mapping, there's going to be breakpoints where the textures don't connect. That's why you look down here in like this breast area. For instance, on the model, you see this like box here that looks like it should be a checker. Then it goes and goes, and then it also gets interrupted by white space. It's because the UVs aren't mapped correctly in that spot. There's a break in the texture. So our goal with UV mapping is going to be to decide which parts go with which, and we're going to manipulate them in the UV texture editor to sew and stitch them all together to where the arm is all with the arm, the legs are all with the legs, the torso is all with the torso, and so forth and so forth. One other thing I want to note before we get started here is in the UV texture editor. If you notice that it is all in this top right quadrant. The texture repeats, but in practice, you always put all of your pieces in the top right quadrant because the map that's going to repeat isn't going to extend itself down here. So it's not like you can do something up here and then do something down here and expect to have a map that does something differently down here than it is up here. It's going to be the same thing down here as it is up here. But if you get into some game engines, they may have some discrepancies, or if you start sending it over to a sculpting program, they don't like it out of this quadrant. So in practice, we're just going to make sure that everything stays inside this one top right quadrant. Okay, so going over some tools before we start UV mapping is our two most used tools are going to be this separate tool, which looks like a pair of scissors, and this stitch tool, which looks like kind of like a translate or part of a translate tool. And then also the unfold tool. The unfold tool pretty much relaxes your UVs. It looks like a little Tetris block. Those are going to be our three go-to tools. We can pretty much almost do everything with these three. One other thing I like to have on, this makes things immensely easier when it comes to once we start stitching things together, sometimes we'll have the UVs overlapping each other, and since they're all white, and you start stitching and cutting, things will start overlapping, and it starts to get visually hard to see where some pieces are going, what is part of what, and it becomes a mess. So to be able to keep things separated, they have this little, looks like a blue box in front of a white box, and keep that checked, and that will make it to where all your pieces turn this light blue color. And if you right click UV, now notice that if you hit vertex and you select vertex and you try to move that around in the UV texture editor, it won't let you, because that's not what the UV texture editor is for one. It's for manipulating UVs. So they'll just give you this warning that says some items aren't able to be moved in 3D space. So anyways, the UVs, however, in this area, if you go to shell, also I gotta also say this, when you select one UV, if you want to select all the UVs that are connected to this one UV on this little piece here, you can right click, and then say to shell, and that'll select all the UVs that are in that piece. And you can move it around. So if you translate it sideways and you overlap them, you'll notice that the overlapping UVs are now this dark blue color. That's how you know that your UVs are overlapping. That's how you can see once you start stitching this stuff together. You can see that that this piece here is not actually right because there's laying over the top of this other piece here. So we still got some stitching to do, obviously. But without that, you would just be looking at this, and you might not know that this piece under here isn't part of this piece. So keeping this piece on, that's great. One other thing I want to also note by having this color enabled, if your UVs are flipped backwards, they'll turn this red color. That is bad. Do not let your UV stay red. Always turn them back to the right blue color. Okay, so another thing I want to kind of point out is that you can auto map your whole mesh like I just did here and start working through the puzzle and trying to figure out what goes to what. However, you might start getting yourself really frustrated and maybe even run out of the room screaming with frustration, just because there's so many little pieces and knowing what goes to what, and having scaling issues. It's really kind of like attacking a 500 piece puzzle, or even a 5,000 piece puzzle in some cases, when you start looking at it like that. And I like to tell my students that it's easier to do a bunch of little 25 piece puzzles than it is to do a 5,000 piece puzzle. So that being said, I usually tell them to say, okay, let's attack one piece at a time. So for instance, let's say that is, once this has been mapped, you can always remap. So we're going to go ahead and select all the faces of this arm here. Okay. And we're going to turn off our texture for right now so I can see what I'm doing. Okay. Okay. So that arm's all selected, and I go to Create UVs, Automatic Mapping, and you see that it took up almost the entire space here. That's fine for right now. And while it's in this mode right now, if you select elsewhere, it's not going to work because if you go and do what I'm about to tell you to do and you select somewhere else, it's going to select everything, and you don't want that. You just want to select what you just mapped. So go to UV, because right now it's kind of in edge mode, or face mode, sorry. Drag a little marquee box over your entire area here that you just mapped out, and you're probably going to be thinking to yourself, Coral, you told me that we're not supposed to bring stuff out of this quadrant, but for working, I do bring things out of the quadrant. I just bring them back when I'm done and fit them into the position I need them. So what I have here is just the mapping for over here. So I'll go ahead and turn that back on so you can see it in 3D as I'm working as well. So as you can see, it looks like the squares are pretty nice, but there's a seam back here that hasn't been really addressed. We'll get to there. First, we're going to start stitching some of these other things together, though. So we're going to go to edge mode, because to stitch, you need to be in edge mode. So to stitch, we're going to select this edge, we're going to select that edge, we're going to select that edge, we're going to select that edge, that edge, that edge, that edge, and that last one. Okay. Now that all these edges right here are selected, going all the way down, you can even look on your model and you'll see that all the edges were selected that I just selected. And then you can go over to not our cut tool, but our stitch tool. And if you look down our UV map window, you'll see that the piece jumped to where it's been stitched. That's great. Okay, so go right click, UV, we're going to pull those apart. So control right click to shell. And now we are looking at our first stitched piece. Okay. So let's go ahead and take care of the rest of this one here real quick. We got this other piece here. I imagine that one fits right on in. Let's check it out. I'm gonna right click to edge, and I'm just gonna do a little box around this whole little area here, and let's take a look. Yep, all that highlighted. That's great. And even this little piece here. I'm not sure about that piece yet, so I'm gonna control marquee a box around it, and that will unselect that piece right there. And now I'm gonna stitch this piece back in. Okay, great. And then I have this last piece here. Okay. Another little marquee box of edges. I'm going to get rid of these bottom ones because I know those ones aren't going to anything that I just mapped. And that last one. Okay, great. And our last move, we're going to stitch this one in. Okay, great. Now, you notice there's this little tail guy over here. And that tail, that's not working for me. He needs to be on this other side where this hole is. So I'm going to cut that guy off. Go back to your edge mode. Click on that edge, and you'll see the scissors. I'm going to click on the scissors, and to cut a piece off, it actually has to cut all the way through the piece. If you only cut, for instance, this piece right here, it's not going to do anything. If I cut right there, nothing happens. I mean, go back to UV mode. Oh, actually, it does happen, but it doesn't happen up here. But so basically, you have to cut all the way through, otherwise you're going to end up with a problem. So we'll stitch this piece back together. There we go. And this piece here that I just cut off, okay, I'm going to draw a little marquee box around that. And now those two edges are highlighted, and if you notice, I didn't point this out earlier that the edges on this other side are highlighted. That's how you know where this is going to go to. So for instance, if I click that one again, this edge over on this side highlights. It's a good way to figure out what goes to what. So going back to our stitch, there it is, our last piece. And if we look, all of our checkers go all the way around, but here's a seam and it's right in the very front. I don't like that. I want the seam to be underneath right here, where, yes, right here, because that looks like a place that doesn't look very visible. And you saw me double click there, and that whole edge loop got selected. Sometimes that's what you want, sometimes it isn't. For instance, let's say we didn't want it to go to the hand. You could also, in the 3D window, control click and get rid of those ones. For me, I don't really mind because I'm planning on remapping all the stuff going down the body anyways. So looking at the hand though in our UV map, you can see that it created this edge line going all the way down, and that is where we want our cut to be. So we're going to go ahead and cut. And now with our new edge, just doing another little marquee box around here. And then we're going to move it with our stitch tool. So stitch it on over there. Okay, great. And there it is. Our seam is underneath in a place that looks like it's not going to get a lot of viewing. And everything on top and around the sides is a nice, well, it's not perfect. Let's see if we could fix it with a little bit of unfolding. Our unfold tool here will even out our UVs. So if we are in UV mode, we can select a group of UVs. And then if we hit our unfold, oh, look at that. Looks a lot better. Let's check out the other side and see if that helps. Okay, there's our UVs. Let's go ahead and unfold. Okay, cool. Now our UVs are all nice and straight, nice and even. So I think this is a good stopping point for right now. Last thing I like to do is once I'm done mapping something is, even though it's not, point is that I can't just grab all these UVs and just drag them down there. That's a problem. You gotta go Control, right click to shell, so I have all of them. And then I'm gonna take them, I'm gonna bring them down into one of the quadrants, just so that I know how much UV space I'm taking up, and that everything starts becoming even as I'm starting to map. So some of the tools still do work here. Rotate obviously doesn't do anything because you can't rotate in 3D view in 2D. But scale does work. So to scale this stuff down, we're going to press R as my quick key for scale. And then if you scale in, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for yes, like that. When the box turns yellow, it's scaling in both directions. And that looks pretty decent. So I'm going to take this piece here. I'm going to put it in this corner down here. And I will start working on the hands. Next lesson, I'm going to leave doing the UVs on the other arm up to you guys because I already showed you how to do it. So in the next lesson, I'll come back. I'll have this arm already UV laid out, and then we'll start working on the hand over on this side, and I'll leave the other hand for you guys to do. So second lesson will be the hand, and we'll see how much time we have to move forward from there. But until then, thank you guys for giving me your time. Hope this has been informative, and I will see you guys in the next lesson.